Okay, well, it's certainly a pleasure to be here. I studied at UC Davis, like Matt suggested, so it's really nice to see Dr. Van Eenenum and look at pictures of fellow graduate students still doing a good job there. So I took this position with NCBA, and I work on behalf of the Beef Checkoff, and certainly want to thank you for giving me that opportunity. Those producers in the room, working for you is a highlight, and it's one of the most rewarding things that I think scientists get to do. So we're going to talk a little bit today about sustainability, and this is usually a pretty hot topic. And I'm going to sort of start with the history and why we care, and then I'm going to provide a high-level overview to sort of put into context a lot of the great work that's being done here and how we utilize that in the sustainability field. So greenhouse gases were really how sustainability got started. And it's not just a problem here in the United States. This is an advertisement from overseas that provides customers another point on which to purchase. Okay? So up here in these little blue bubbles here are the carbon footprints of each one of these products. Okay? Now, I'm sure many of you have also heard about the Meatless Monday campaigns, where the mayor of San Francisco, and this actually occurred when I was in graduate school in California, so I got to see this front and center, but he actually suggested that all schools and hospitals forego meat on Monday in an effort to curb their carbon footprint. Now, most of you should think, well, that's funny. Where did this data come from? Okay, so this data actually originated from the Livestock's Long Shadow report that was published in 2006 by the United Nations. Now, that report suggested that livestock is responsible for 18% of all anthropogenic, that's just a fancy word for man-made, okay, greenhouse gases. And that that eating a 16-ounce T-bone was like a Hummer on a plate, and that switching to vegetarianism could shrink your carbon footprint by 1.5 tons per year. Okay, so I was a first-year master's student when this report came out, and my advisor came in, and there was an office, okay, at Davis, and I'm sure everywhere else, but at Davis, they crammed 4 graduate students in one office, okay? And we were all sitting around. I was in there with a couple of Allison students, actually. We were all sitting around, and Frank walks in with this book. Have any of you ever seen Livestock's Long Shadow? It's a book. And he threw it down on my desk, as you know, only a PI can. He threw it down on my desk, and he said, "Welcome to the team, Stackhouse. Figure out what the heck this thing says." I said, "Oh, great." Okay, because really, as a graduate student, how wrong can the UN be? Right? And that was sort of my initial reaction. So we started looking through this report, and the first thing that popped out was that the United States Environmental Protection Agency suggests that livestock is only responsible for 3.4% of all man-made greenhouse gases. So obviously that's a bit different, right? 18 and 3.4. So then our jobs became trying to figure out, okay, where is this difference and why is it occurring? So first and foremost, the UN actually compared livestock to transport. And they said that livestock was worse than all of the world's transportation when it came to greenhouse gases. Okay? Now, the reason that they arrived at that statement is because they did a complete life cycle assessment for livestock, but they only measured tailpipe emissions for cars. Okay? And we're going to sort of spend some time and really educate you as to why that's a problem. So believe it or not, this is getting kind of messed up, so I apologize. Believe it or not, the UN did not set out to start an anti-meat campaign. Okay, and I think most of us in the industry, especially in the beef industry, really believe that that's exactly what they intended to do, and that they pretty well accomplished it, because no one ever picked on beef before for being an environmental problem, okay, certainly when it came to greenhouse gases. But what they actually intended to do was to write the very first article on how we were going to feed 9 billion people in 2050. In 2050, we're going to need 70% more food than we have today. And that's a lot, that's a big number. And the reason we're going to need 70% more food is because we have third world countries today where people are starving. And we also know from some ERS data that as incomes increase 10%, the consumption of red meat increases 9%. So we're going to have to produce a lot more food here in the beef industry. So when we talk about sustainability, the one thing that our critics and those of us in agriculture can agree on and usually we're very comfortable in this common ground, is that sustainability is about a continuous improvement over time. Okay? And I'm in good company today because genomics is about that too, right? And so is feed efficiency. Research is about a continuous improvement over time. In the US beef industry, that's our motto. We have been continuously improving over time for ages. The other very common definition that we have is that sustainability is about doing more with less. It's about utilizing fewer resources today to accomplish what we need to accomplish in 2050. Beef is a very important part of that, and this sustainability project was funded by the operating committee back in 2010 to start to address or start to answer some of these questions about how we were going to continue down the sustainable path. Now, one of the questions I get most often from producers is, my family has been sustaining for generations. I'm a 5th or 6th or 7th generation rancher. And I get that. And the Beef Promotions Operating Committee was very insightful in 2010 because they knew that that story wasn't good enough for today's consumer without the data to back it up. So the internet, while it has created some fantastic things, has also opened a lot of doors, especially for people my age. Okay, the millennial consumer, a story isn't good enough anymore. And that's a sad thing, but we'll sit there, and I'm guilty of it too. Okay, I'll listen to something that somebody says, and I'll say, oh, okay, yeah, I believe you. And I go home, and what do? You Google it. That's right. Yeah, I Google it. I'm like, I don't really believe you. So I Google it. So the beef industry had to start to develop this benchmarking work to say, okay, this is where we're at, and now not only do we have stories, but we've got numbers. And that was really the intent of this initial funding project. So this is a slide that I added after I got to travel to Yale University to speak to a group of their graduate students. They have a PhD there in environmental science, basically, and I got to talk to some of their best and brightest, and it occurred to me that they did not understand that a zero impact is not possible, that reality was not first and forefront in their minds. They didn't understand that the clothes we wear, the vehicles we drive, and the houses we live in cause an impact. And that impact enables us as humans to sustain life. So I've started adding it. And I leave it in presentations when I come and talk to people who are very real. I was at Texas Cattle Feeders Association meeting last week, and I put this up, and they looked at me like, Kim, really? But I do that to warn you as producers. Guess what, guys? Like, not only are we fighting folks that aren't on farms anymore, and we're doing a lot to educate them, but we also need to be aware that their realities may not be our realities. Okay? And we need to start talking to them about biological systems not being 100% efficient. Why? Because they're biological systems, right? We need to do some educating there. So in 2010, when a group of producers came and sat on this advisory committee to begin to study the sustainability of the beef industry, they were some of the most forward-thinking folks that I think that I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And the reason for that is because they were able to define sustainability for the beef industry in the most progressive way that they could. They were some of the very first to define it as being a balance between the environment, economic, and social. Today, this definition is widely understood and widely accepted. In 2010, they were some of the founding people of this sort of thought. And that has really set this whole project up to really lead in the sustainability arena. And beef is getting a lot of credit for that. I was talking to some folks earlier today, and that this kind of audience is not an audience I get to come talk to very often. Most of the time I'm in front of registered dietitians. I'm talking to chefs. I'm educating them about the positives of beef. Okay, I'm defending what we do every day. I don't usually get to come talk about, hey guys, this is what sustainability is, and this is how you fit. Usually it's the flip side. So these people actually have enabled a lot of the positive that we have gotten out of this project. So the next thing we had to do is, with this very expansive definition, we had to figure out who we were going to partner with. Because at that time, sustainability was all about what? Anybody remember what we talked about in the beginning? Carbon footprint. That's all we cared about, okay, in 2010. That's all anybody was studying, and it's all we cared about. So we had to reach out to people who thought bigger. And we reached out to two, BASF, the chemical company, and USDA ARS. In USDA, we worked with yours truly right here, the Meat Animal Research Center. And we worked with the Pasture Systems and Watershed Management Research Unit in State College, Pennsylvania. Okay, and these two teams combined have completed over 600 life cycle assessments looking at all three aspects of sustainability. Now, I'll also tell you that most of these life cycle assessments that have been completed were on laundry detergent. Okay, laundry detergent's pretty darn easy. It's soap, and there's a plastic bottle. Beef production is much more difficult, and we're going to sort of get into why and how we got through that. So the objective of this project was to conduct this comprehensive assessment of the entire U.S. beef industry for the first time, comparing all three components from birth of the animal to actual consumption. And we actually went past consumption and into the landfill. So, packaging that your beef comes in, we now know what the impact is from birth of that animal until when that packaging goes to the landfill. We looked at it over time in the 70s, 2005-ish, and 2011. Can anybody tell me why we would care? What happened in the late 60s, early 70s in this industry? Major. Any processors in the room? Feeders? What happened? Box beef. Yeah, good job. You guys are good. Box beef. So in the late 60s, early 70s, we were still shipping swinging sides. So how much more efficient did we get when we started processing carcasses in-house and shipping them to retailers now as box product? What happened in the early 2000s, mid-2000s? Nebraska, you guys should really know this. Ethanol and distillers' grains. Yep, exactly. So we tried to pick time periods where there was a major shift in our industry so we could understand, okay, what did this shift do? Now, the 1970s has an asterisk. Basically, there's fantastic data available on the on-farm side because of facilities like this one, the Meat Animal Research Center. Because the scientists here have tracked everything, and I'm talking everything, to the detail of actually knowing how much fuel their tractors used to harvest a corn field back into the late 60s. Do you think the packers have that kind of information? No. So we only have the 70s back to farm. Today you're going to see only 2005 and 2011 because I think it's really important to talk about this full chain, especially the first time you hear it. And then if you want to come up and talk to me about the on-farm portion, we absolutely can. For the social component of life cycle assessment, this is very, very new in this science, and this will be the very first industry to ever complete a social life cycle assessment. So really breaking some ground there. Okay, so I want to start first, because this is usually a very sensitive topic, with the what did we find. And as I work with my communication experts at NCBA, they take us little scientists and they turn us all around and they say, no, you cannot present your research the results at the end, because everyone gets all upset when these very touchy subjects. So put it in the front and let everyone breathe a sigh of relief. So in 6 years, just comparing 2005 to 2011, the beef industry has improved 7%. Looking at all three pillars of sustainability. If you want to pull out just the environment, you've improved 10%. When I present this to those not so friendly audiences that aren't full of beef producers, they're in absolute shock. Can anybody tell me why? Beef is considered the worst offender when it comes to sustainability. And they just cannot believe that we actually have been improving. Why are we improving? Because of all the good work scientists are doing to make us produce more with less. Okay, so all of the work we're talking about here today, I get to use all of that good information and funnel it up and talk about things in a broader perspective. So the next question I always get is, okay, that's great. We've been working on this for 5 years, or you've measured it for 5 years, and we've improved 10%, but I wasn't trying to improve the environmental sustainability of my operation by 10%. So where are those improvements coming from? So I broke this out into two parts. This is on farm and this is off farm. Improvements in crop yields, machinery technology, irrigation technology, manure management, precision farming, and animal performance. I married a guy from North central Kansas in Belleville, not far from here. And we were home, and it was grain harvest. I was driving a grain truck. And the farmer we were helping, their neighbor, they think I'm crazy. First of all, I'm from California. Second of all, I study sustainability. They think I'm absolutely nuts. And Brad Hobelman, if anybody of you are from here, said, hey, so Kim, how's your work going? I think you're crazy, but how's your work going? I said, oh, it's going good. It's like, you crop farmers, and, I make fun of you all the time because I'm a beef girl, but, you do help us quite a bit. And he said, well, what do you mean? And what can I do different? Is there anything I can help you with now? And I said, well, Brad, those 3 irrigation pivots you're replacing? He said, yeah. I said, that's going to help me. Why? How old are irrigation pivots around here? Pretty old. They're pretty old, right? I mean, most of them I think were put in the 70s. Is that accurate? In the 70s? That's what he told me. And I said, well, I guarantee you the new pivots you're putting in are much more water and energy efficient than the pivots you had in the 70s. Okay? So that's just an example of how we don't really have to try, and we do a little bit better. And then I get to take all the credit for it in these great studies. Okay? Off farm, we had some incredible things happening at the packing industry. In the last 5 years, the advent of biogas capture, so actually utilizing fat and blood, okay, in the production of energy to power their plants. Some of these plants are actually 60% of their energy is powered off of biogas recovery. Closed loop water cooling systems, really incredible stuff there, and wastewater recycling. So I'm an animal scientist, trained by Davis, and for the first time I was working with these BASF chemical company people, and they said to me, well, you guys right size package. I'm like, we what? What? We do what? What is a right size package? So I've learned a lot here, but I challenge each and every one of you to go to your grocery stores and look at the packaging, not just of beef, but of everything. Beef, the perfect example is the 1 pound chub. How we can buy ground beef now, right? In the vacuum packaged 1 pound chub. Much less packaging than the styrofoam trays. But go look at Capri Suns. Okay, so this was the big one to me. So my mom gave me a Capri Sun in my lunch every day. And y'all remember, they were pretty big. Millennials in here that are my age, I mean, Capri Sun was big. Capri Suns now are much smaller, and the juice is much more compact. Why are people right-sized packaging? Think it's for the environmental implications? No, what's it for? Dollars, right? Yeah, dollars. Yeah, less packaging, less transport, more money. Okay, so we're taking advantage of those things too. So there were also some things that really surprised us. When we started this project, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit, we actually did a survey of some friends and some foes, and we asked them, okay, what do you think are the major sustainability problems in the beef industry? Greenhouse gases did not come up. Carbon footprint is not an issue to them anymore. We have shifted. Sustainability is bigger than that now. There's also been huge improvements achieved from alternative energy production on the packing side. And what's more, food waste. What percentage of food is wasted by the average American today? 40%. That's right, good job, 40%, 40. Okay, beef is wasted less than that. Only 20% of beef is wasted because we have a high valued item and it tastes good. But if we could reduce our food waste by half, we would improve our sustainability another 10%. Okay? Now this is something that the checkoff is actually looking into currently, trying to partner with other agricultural commodities who are going through the same thing. Okay, because when it comes to food waste, this is not a fight beef has to fight alone. This is a societal change that I truly believe this, it has to take place if we intend to feed the world in 2050. Okay, we have to stop wasting food. Okay, so I don't have to explain to you how complex the beef industry is, but I am going to use this slide to talk a little bit about what life cycle assessment is. So life cycle assessment is really just an accounting tool, okay, of inputs and outputs. Now the beef industry, again, very challenging. Why? Because we don't have inputs and outputs like laundry detergent. We have inputs and outputs like soil type, fertilizer, sun, rain. Holy cow, it all varies, it all depends. We have growth rates, we have metabolism, we have different breeds, we have all these things, right, taking place. So we had to somehow figure out how to capture all of those inputs and outputs on farm. And I'm going to talk to you about how we did that. And then off farm, we had to capture those too. And I've got a good example here in the packing sector that sort of puts into perspective how detailed this data collection was. So we were with one of our packing collaborators, we had 3, sitting around a table about a year ago with some of their lead engineers. And we're going through an Excel spreadsheet that has every single one of their input lines. 600,000 input lines. And we are in the paper category. Okay, life cycle assessment is broken out by different resources. We're in paper. Okay, and we figure out how much toilet paper that plant uses every day. Okay, so we have it by case. Okay, so I'm sitting there with another PhD, my boss, Bo Reagan, and I looked at Bo, I said, you know how much toilet paper is in a case? And he said, no. I looked around the room, everybody's shaking their head, we've got no idea. So what do? Millennials? You Google how much toilet paper is in a case, that's right. So then what do? Now you know how much toilet paper is in the case, or how many toilet paper rolls are in the case, then what? You Google how much paper is on a toilet paper roll. And we had to figure out if that was greater or less than 1% of the total paper used in that packing plant. Okay? That's the level of detail involved in this life cycle assessment. So the project had 3 parts. The first part was this hotspot analysis where we asked our friends and foes, what do you think about beef sustainability? The reason we did that is so that we asked the right questions. If we don't know what the criticism is, we're not going to frame the research questions to answer it. The next thing we did is a life cycle assessment, which involved all 3 pillars, definitely the most complex part of the project. And then finally, we are currently developing a life cycle assessment tool that can be used by individuals within the industry. So this hotspot analysis was not something I was a big fan of. I'm trained as a scientist. I don't care what anyone thinks. And I certainly am not going to ask them what they perceive, okay, something is that's based in science. But I did it because I basically got told I had to. All right, and basically what we did is we reviewed the non-scientific literature. Okay, crazy, right, to this group. We live in scientific literature. We live in peer review. We couldn't. We had to get outside of that. We had to go to magazines. We had to go to Google and ask what beef sustainability meant. Then we asked our stakeholders what they meant. And then we were able to understand better why and what their definition of beef sustainability was. Okay, to some people, it's only animal health and welfare. To our friends at McDonald's, it's all about traceability. To some, it's biodiversity. To others, it's water emissions. Some, it's water use. Others, it's land management. Sometimes it's rural economies and efficiencies. Other times, it's food availability and cost. So I was a young scientist just out of graduate school. And I got all these results back, and I was like, okay, so now I have to design a research project out of this, fine, whatever. This doesn't matter anyway. This really matters. Because this is a really big umbrella, okay, to try to direct research over. There's a lot of things that people are worried about with beef. Okay, so just keep that into perspective as we go through this. So on some of these issues, we're not going to cover all of them with this first project, but we're working very hard to address as many as we can. So this life cycle assessment, we actually use 2 models. And for those of you who model, you know that we're crazy for trying to use 2. But we had to. We had to because of the complexity of the beef industry. So on one side, we used pre-harvest, okay, on farm, which was done by USDA ARS with a partnership between the Meat Animal Research and the Pasture Systems and Watershed Management units in State College, Pennsylvania. On the post-harvest side, we used BASF model, the eco-efficiency model. Okay? Basically what happened is data from the pre-harvest side merged with post-harvest, and what you get is an eco-efficiency portfolio. An eco-efficiency portfolio looks something like this. This is an example. Financial costs are normalized on the x-axis. Environmental impact is normalized on the y-axis. What you'll know is that the higher the cost or the environmental impact is actually at the XY intercept. Okay, that's backwards, right, of how most graphs are put together. So something with low eco-efficiency or low sustainability is down here at the XY intercept, and something with high eco-efficiency or high sustainability is out pushed away from the XY intercept. This provides a very simple and understandable graphic to a very complex question that we hope we'll be able to utilize in those registered dietitian, chef, consumer-based audiences to basically prove why y'all have been in business for generations and generations and generations, okay? So let's talk about what these 2 models are. So on farm, we use the integrated farm systems model. This is a model that's available online, and it's based in math, something that we're all very comfortable with here. So it's got growth equation. It's based off of the Cornell nutrition model. It's published extensively, and again, that transparency is just phenomenal. But probably what's neatest about it is that it's actually based on weather. So the model predicts or takes into account 25 years of weather, simulated or measured every single minute. And from that, those mathematical equations predict what's happening on farm. Okay, so that in that way we can basically assess the inputs and the outputs. On the post-harvest side, think back to that toilet paper example. It's very simple. Inputs, outputs, environmental impact. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about how IFSM works. We're going to stop here with this crop production. So we know that alfalfa fixes nitrogen. What else does alfalfa need? Water, sunlight. Does it grow different depending upon what soil type it has? Or what soil type, yeah, you got it, right? So based on those things, we can predict what that crop yield will be, how big the tractor needs to be to harvest the crop, okay? What volatile loss will be taken during storage, okay? Then we know based on the animal type what that diet needs to be. We know what the diet, based on the animal type and the life stage and what that animal was fed, we know how much manure was produced and what the nutrient content is of that manure. Then we know how that manure can be land applied to reestablish a crop. Okay? All right. So let's talk about how this works. Ammonia is one of the most simple, okay, processes. So imagine mathematical equations embedded behind this process. So we know that urea is excreted, right, in urine from the animal. And we know that the amount of the urea depends on what? Nitrogen content, right? Protein content in the diet. Based on temperature and velocity, carbon dioxide and ammonium, okay, will hydrolyze. Ammonia volatilizes based on temperature and velocity, outward and up, okay? Now this picture is probably a little bit difficult for you to see, but these calves on the side of the feed yard are a little bit bigger, right? And these calves are a little smaller. Are they on different diets? You betcha. Is that going to impact the amount of ammonia that it volatilizes? You betcha. Do we need to know exactly what that is? Heck yes we do, because we want an accurate representation. Okay, so that just gives you a little insight into how that model really works. So then the next question I always get is, well, that's fantastic. You've built something, or Al Rotz has built something that uses math to predict what I do. But is it accurate? Okay, so this is some work that was done by Andy Cole in a Texas feed yard. Day of year is down here. Ammonia emissions in grams per head per day is on your y-axis. Measured emissions are in red. Simulated emissions are in green. Okay, there is a seasonal pattern to ammonia. Temperature goes down. There's less ammonia, so y'all in Nebraska, here in the middle of winter, no ammonia. In Texas, they're still going to have a little. Basically, what you need to see is that the model does do a really good job using those mathematical equations to predict ammonia. I always get asked, Kim, what's going on right here? That's actually malfunction of ammonia analyzers. Ammonia analyzers are very, very sensitive. They're difficult to use, so there's a lot of human error when we do that. So sometimes our models can actually do a better job. So we basically took that model, and I went to, at the time, Tom Field was one of my bosses, and Bo Reagan was the other one. And I said, you know, guys, you're going to need to use IFSM because, you know, basically these normal life cycle assessment models aren't good enough for on-farm. And they said, that's great, Kim, how does it work? And I gave them a similar presentation on, okay, this is how it works. These are these mathematical equations, and this is how we've validated it. And they said, that's nice, I don't believe you. Figure out a way to prove to me that this works on a whole farm. And so I came to visit John Pollock. And I pitched this to Dr. Pollock. And I said, I need a database to prove that this model actually does what we're saying it's doing. So we came to Mark. And the best thing about Mark is that everything is here. Okay? All of the feed production, all of the feed processing, all of the feed lot cattle are fed, all the cow-calf is here, and the scientists here have recorded everything for a very long time. And so we did a model evaluation. We asked, based on the data inputs that we were inputting into the IFSM model, how well it was going to predict mark. And this is just an example of feed production. And all you guys really need to focus on is what we're trying to predict here and what the percent change is. Okay? Basically, the model does a fantastic job at representing the Meat Animal Research Center. Did we make some tweaks? You betcha. This was absolutely worth doing. Okay? So it does do a great job. We feel very confident now that we'll take this model into different regions. Okay? Because while you all are very comfortable with me presenting mark data on behalf of the entire United States, The boys in Texas are not so comfortable with it, okay? They're not so comfortable with it. They think that their way is better, and the guys in Florida get very nervous, okay, when we start talking about similarities between Nebraska and Florida. So it's nice to be in an audience where everyone's like, oh, that's wonderful, but usually it does not go that well. But we'll then take this validated model and we'll take it into different regions, and we'll basically predict the sustainability of those regions and put them into a national average. Okay, so we're about to get into the data. We've already mentioned that we've got data from 3 packing plants. It's representative of approximately 60% of the slaughtered animals. A lot of the cow kills, in other words, don't have these big biogas generators. Okay, these are predominantly at corn-fed type, calf-fed slaughter facilities at this point. We had some problems. The retailers did not want to participate. They still have not participated, so that data is not primary. And we pulled that from government sources. Okay, so first and foremost, this is a benchmark. Okay, it's only comparing 2005 and 2011. It's been submitted for certification. This is something I also learned after I got out of graduate school. When you're trained in animal science, and I think every other discipline as well, that peer review is it. That's the best. There's nothing better. Well, I got to learn that in the life cycle assessment world, not only do you have to be peer reviewed, but you also have to go through third-party certification. Okay, so we're getting third-party certified right now by the National Standards Foundation. It's the largest certification company in the world. They're the same certification company that certify ISO standards for those engineers in the room. Okay, so we're going through that. They're validating. They actually verify every single data input, so they have a very big job ahead of them. We've been through the first pass, had to make a few slight changes, but nothing real minor, so we're hoping that the rest of it goes as well as the first part has. You're not going to see any social data. Well, you'll see very little social data. At this point, we're still working through some of this. The beef industry is very complex, and no one has done social data before, so we're building a lot of these databases for folks like fertilizer and corn and toilet paper, or whoever else we need to build those databases for. And you're going to see everything here expressed in user benefit, which is just 1 pound of minimally processed boneless edible consumed beef. It's the denominator of everything you're about to see. So this is the eco-efficiency portfolio of the beef industry comparing 2005 and 2011. 2005 is this blue bubble. 2011 is this blue bubble. You can see an improvement in our sustainability over time. If you pull out why, basically, it's sort of shifting back this way. It's because when you put every single aspect of our industry together, it's very difficult to look at production costs. Okay, the production costs on cow-calf are different than those in a feed yard, are different than those in a processing facility. So when you do that, you look at things based on consumer price. Okay, now do I know what this would look like with production costs? Absolutely. And if we wanted to just look at one segment, we could do that. But for this, it's put together in consumer price. So from 2005 to 2011, we've seen a slight increase in consumer price. That's why that's going to sway backwards. Usually this slide is pretty powerful, right? Because I think that it's something that the beef industry is concerned about. And I'm actually from a diversified background of cattle and sheep. And I liken this, right, to what we don't want to have happen in the beef industry. What's happened in the lamb business? Yeah, you don't eat it, right? When do we eat it? Easter, right? We don't want that to happen in the beef industry. So I do think that it's very important that we continue to worry about consumer price, okay? The checkoff is obviously very, very concerned about consumer price. We need to just remember that making our product affordable to that consumer is really what keeps us in the game, okay? And that's important. That's why we talk about it here. When you pull out the environmental sustainability of this, and there's 2 social indicators on here as well, we show an environmental fingerprint. The blue is again 2011, the green is 2005. So in these 7 indicators, we have shrunk our environmental fingerprint over 6 years. Okay, some more than others. We're going to get into exactly what these things say. This is just a relevance factor to describe basically the best way to describe this is that while all environmental impact categories are important, some are more important than others. Okay, so right here in Clay Center, Nebraska, the relevance factor of ozone depleting potential, which is basically emissions that contribute to the ozone hole, are less important than emissions or pollution to water. Would you all agree? In Clay Center, Nebraska? Okay, so that provides some regionalization of these environmental impact categories, in case you guys are interested. Okay, so let's go into emissions. Under emissions, we have 3 different categories: solid waste, air, and water. Okay, these are emissions to soil. We measure those in as they go to landfill. When we talk about air, there's 4 different ones: greenhouse gases, ozone depletion potential, photochemical ozone creation potential, and acidification potential. Greenhouse gases, easy, right? Carbon footprint. Ozone depletion potential, emissions that contribute to the ozone hole. Photochemical ozone creation potential, summer smog. I don't think you guys have summer smog here in Nebraska, no. So it probably has a 2% or something. Yeah, I think it does. 2% relevance factor. We're not going to talk about these 2 in Nebraska. They're not important. If we were in California, this would be highly important. Colorado, highly important, okay? There's some areas in the world where this is a problem. And then acidification potential. In agriculture, these are nitrogenous emissions, ammonia and nitrous oxide, okay? And then water, really standard, BOD, COD, heavy metals, total nutrients. So when we look at solid waste emissions, in 2005 versus 2011, that's what you're going to see on the rest of the graphs. And then here is just a relevance factor, a weighted relevance factor of how we can capture this in a succinct way with every sector put together. The majority of our emissions are coming from on-farm. That should surprise most of you, because most of you who are farmers or ranchers probably think, I don't send much to the landfill. Okay? This is actually coming from secondary emissions in the production of fertilizer. So think back to the toilet paper example. On farm, we have to care about fertilizer. When we produce fertilizer, there is basically some of product that goes into the landfill. What I want you guys to focus, though, on is the majority of this post-harvest, okay, contributions. And I want you to focus heavily on this part. What do you think that is? We've talked about it once. Packaging and, more importantly, food waste. Food waste, yep, food waste. So this again is one of the areas where I think if we could get on top of this food waste issue and convince consumers that vacuum packaged beef is a good thing, we could seriously improve the sustainability of the industry in some of these categories. Greenhouse gas emissions should surprise nobody that all of this is coming from on-farm. I preach and I preach and I preach, and normally I don't show data, I show pictures because the people I talk to don't care about data. But normally I speak and I sit there and I talk to them about A, greenhouse gases are important in the environment. It's the reason that we can sustain life on Earth. B, we're not going to do much to change the methane production from our mama cows that are out grazing grass. Okay? And usually I just ask them to please just leave us alone when it comes to greenhouse gases, because while we can achieve improvements in efficiency, really changing this is very difficult, and we've been working for years and years and years and years and years in the academic community, and we've made good, I think pretty significant reductions, but when you put it all together, very, very small reductions. Okay, 0.5%, 0.75%. It's very hard to touch. Focus here. Again, I heard this earlier. What do you think this is? It's actually emissions coming from refrigerants, okay? So greenhouse gases have different capacity to hold heat. Carbon dioxide is like the styrofoam coffee cup, okay? It's terrible at it. 30 seconds, your coffee is cold. Then the mug is like methane, okay? It's 25 times better at trapping heat than the styrofoam CO2. Nitrous oxide is our most potent greenhouse gas in agriculture. It's like the mega Starbucks thermos. Okay, it's 310 times trapping heat as one molecule of CO2. A refrigerant is 4,500 times better at trapping heat than one molecule of CO2. Okay, these refrigerants were put in the late 70s. They don't do a very good job. The retailers need to update. All right. Okay, acidification potential, again, mostly coming from on-farm. This is predominantly ammonia emissions coming from the cow-calf and the feeding sectors. There's been a slight increase, actually, in ammonia production coming from the feeding sector because of because we now feed distillers' grains. It's kind of an unintended consequence of ethanol production. One of the reasons that we need to be a little bit, more thoughtful before we go down sort of these paths if we're going to continue to regulate on some of these issues. If you guys have questions about how we did that or what we're talking about as we move on, we can absolutely answer those. Water emissions, this is one of the most positive stories that we have in the beef industry. We've decreased pollution to water by 10% in 6 years. Good job. I think it's just phenomenal that there's been that much of a decrease. Again, most of this is coming from on farm. This is very simple, just nutrient leaching. No biological system is 100% efficient, but the improvements we've seen here are just remarkable. Occupational illnesses and accidents. This is actually a social component of the model. So we're looking at both occupational disease and fatal working accidents, but there's also a component of this model that's flexible. So we were able to include animal welfare using beef quality assurance certification, and also food safety. So all of the E. coli reductions are included in this as well. Again, an absolutely astounding story of a 30% reduction. So most people don't appreciate the social aspect of beef production, and yet most of the work that we've done would suggest just a fantastic story there that we honestly did not know existed. Obviously, the packing sector owns a relatively large chunk of occupational illnesses and accidents in our business. There's a lot of knives, a lot of people, and those chains move pretty fast. All right, but anytime we can get improvements, that's going to help us all. Toxicity potential looks at chemical exposure to workers. So basically, when we're exposed to chemicals, they can cause us harm. Those that would cause cancer are weighted more heavily than those that would cause a respiratory disease. These are again occurring on farm, and again for the same reason, fertilizer production. Okay, so in the manufacturing of fertilizer, it is a relatively hazardous occupation. Is it hazardous to us when we apply it? No, not as much as in the production. But because of these life cycle assessment and these secondary emissions, we have to take account for that. Again, though, extremely positive story. I think there's been almost a 16% reduction or something, incredible in 5 years. So resource consumption, and I want you guys to focus on what these units are. Okay, very, very small. In our business, this would look at things like coal, gas, any sort of energy production. We don't use a lot of energy. Okay, while we do have fuel in our tractors and fuel in our irrigation pumps, this contribution is relatively small. We've got some low-hanging fruit here in the retailer and at the consumer end. Matter of fact, when I first saw this data, I was shocked that the consumer even jumped up at all, right? Because you think about all of us in our homes, and in the big scheme of things with packing plants and all sorts of other things, how could I make a difference? Well, upgrade your appliances. It really does make a difference. And I got a big lecture from the BASF guys who actually study this, that the consumer actually owns a bigger piece than what anybody would ever expect. So there's some low-hanging fruit there. Water use, no surprise. We irrigate crops. We feed them to cattle. Actual consumption of the animal is less than 1%. Okay, all of this is in irrigation. All right, but still a tremendous reduction. Great job, better crop yields, more efficient farming, etc. Land use also shouldn't surprise any of us. This would include both land use for crop production and land use for grazing. Okay, there's been a reduction again in 6 years of 4%, which I think is just incredible, that we're continuing to produce more and more food on less and less land. And then finally, energy consumption. And this slide is very deceiving. This is one of the changes that we've had to make after the first pass when we got back from NSF and that third-party certification. They actually asked us to include embodied energy. Okay, embodied energy is basically if you were to burn the corn that we feed cattle, it would be the energy that was embodied in that corn kernel if you were going to use it for heat production. Okay, so if you were going to use that energy for another reason than to feed our cattle, we had to include that. We didn't want to include that because the beef industry is not going to stop feeding cattle, right? Because there's a huge demand for fed cattle. But when you pull the embodied energy out, the consumer owns 1/3 of actual energy that we can reduce, okay? So we're going to talk about this. So if we were to look at only non-renewable energy, which is the only actual thing that we can control or work to improve on the beef industry's perspective, the consumer would own 1/3 of that, okay? So when you take in some of this data, make sure you're understanding that allocation appropriately. Basically, on farm, we've done an exceptional job reducing energy, continuing to reduce energy. Again, a lot of that's going to land in the consumer's plate. It is very, very, very energy intensive to cook and to refrigerate in a consumer's home. Absolutely, very energy intensive. So in conclusion, I think we've got some really positive messages. In the past 6 years, according to the assumptions we used, which were based here in the Meat Animal Research Center, the reduction of solid waste has been 7%. We've reduced greenhouse gas production by 1%. We've reduced pollution to water by 10%. We've reduced land use by 4%. We've reduced water use by 10%. We've reduced occupational illnesses and accidents by 32%. We've reduced energy and resource use by 2%. We've reduced toxicity potential by 16%. We've reduced emissions contributing to acidification potential, so those nitrogenous emissions, by 6%. The total environmental burden is reduced 7%, and our overall sustainability is reduced 10%, and the overall sustainability is reduced 7%. So, good job. And let me tell you, other industries aren't showing this kind of improvement. So really good job, really, really good job. So in January we met as an industry and we asked people to tell me, I basically asked a group to say, all right, direct my checkoff dollars as we move into 2013 and 2014. And this group was extremely insightful. They said, we want regional simulations. Nebraska's not good enough. Sorry guys, I know it's good enough for y'all, but everyone else wants complete regional simulations and absolute averages and all sorts of good stuff. The cow-calf guys said we have to understand our ecosystem. You have to tell me what sustainable grazing lands mean and how that plays into this role. They also were interested in nitrogen emissions and they wanted to expand the social indicators to understand what rural communities meant. Right, coming from the beef industry. The feeders had similar wants and needs. The one thing that they added was animal welfare and dissemination into leadership programs. So I'm glad we've got some leadership people here. That allows me to check a box that I didn't even know I was going to get to check today. Packer and case ready. They want to get the definition of sustainability into the beef quality assurance program so that we can have a consistent definition up and down the value chain. And then the retailers at the time committed to contributing to the project. We'll see if that actually happens. They promised to reduce their greenhouse gas leakage, work on food waste, and optimize packaging. So I think when we sit back and we talk about sustainability and as touchy a subject as it is, I think it's going to allow us to do some really great things. I think we've got an outstanding story. And maybe one of the first proactive beef stories we've had in a really long time that's positive. It's based in good science and it gives us a baseline. Are we done? Absolutely not. It's going to allow us to focus in the right area of the supply chain. So, for example, food waste. Okay, that's a big issue that we need to work to address. And then, of course, it effectively addresses the needs for more sustainable alternatives. And then there's three things that I've learned a lot since joining this team and working on this project. And I think these are things not only that are important to sustainability, but to live by. That it's about a continuous improvement over time. It's a journey, not a destination. And that's when it comes to sustainability and research in general. And that we have a sustainable product and we want a more we have a sustainable product today and we want a more sustainable product tomorrow. And we will always want that and we always have wanted that. And then I wanted to leave you with three little things that I stole from a friend, Cameron Brewitt, who works for JBS. He's their sustainability guy, and we sat on a panel together in January. Dr. Pollack was with me. I've been quoting Cameron ever since. And he challenged the group, and I think that it was very powerful. He said, be proud of who you are, don't let anybody define you, and let's feed the world. So I'm going to leave you with the same thing. Be proud. You guys have done an outstanding job. This industry is a really good one to work for, and you've always fed the world. So I don't think you have much to worry about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt, and I thank you very much for your time.